session. If you are standing, I'm going to come over to you and make you say something. If you're still standing, you're going to be on the camera. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, it worked. So we are, if I could have your attention, everybody, thank you. I would like to thank our singer, Leah Seligman, who sang that song so beautifully. Hello. Thank you. So, in that original exploratory party that John Jacob Astor funded overland, they got scared of the Native Americans that were along the path that Lewis and Clark followed, because they met a guy who had been scalped but had survived to talk about it. So they took a lower route, and they inadvertently, through a winter that none of us should ever live through, discovered what became later the cross over the Rocky Mountains that became the pathway that most used on the Oregon Trail. And it was no mistake that they were coming to the mouth of the Columbia, because, as you know, at that point in history, everything moved by water, and cities grew, industries grew, because you could move product from one location to another. And it's been fascinating. In many of the discussions we've had today, people have talked about the needs, the opportunities. A lot of it's tied to infrastructure. How do I get my product from one place to another easily and efficiently and competitively? And so now we're going to spend a few minutes talking about infrastructure, which I know is what you were dying to come back to after lunch, right? They're all asleep. You ate turkey sandwiches and you fell asleep. Okay, great. So infrastructure is actually fascinating, and as I prepared for this panel, one of the things that became clear to me is, I think of infrastructure, you make infrastructure investments, you build a bridge. It's a static thing, you create jobs for that particular project. More and more what I've learned is that infrastructure is a catalyst. It's an opportunity, not only to create that fixed piece of property or land, but it's really to catalyze an opportunity for community to take hold of. And we have a couple of guys who know way more about this than I do. To my left, we have Bill Wyatt, who is the executive director for the Port of Portland. And to my right is Mr. Gary Neal, the general manager of the Port of Morrow. So, Bill, let's start with you. Give us a sense of Oregon's footprint in terms of what does it mean in terms of infrastructure, trade, how does it matter in terms of global trade?
So I think actually
Do we have his mic on? Can you talk for a second?
Can you hear me? You have to be up here in the first three rows. All right.
Here, let's use
Okay.
that one.
All right, good.
And is that one on?
Is this one on? Yes, it
Yes,
is.
great.
Okay, great.
I'll share.
I think the morning has been a great tee-up for this conversation, because if you think about agriculture, you think about timber, these are industries that simply couldn't survive without the kind of infrastructure that we have developed over the course of the last 150 years. In fact, my favorite piece of infrastructure is one that no one here has ever seen. Some of you may have experienced indirectly, but it's the Columbia River Navigation Channel, which was recently deepened from 40 feet to 43 feet. Now, this was really the piece of infrastructure that causes all of us to be here today in Portland, because it developed the whole trading system that Astor and his investors really sought to exploit. And 3 feet. So 3 feet, this approximately is 3 feet. Think about a vessel that is 3 football fields long, weighs 65,000 tons, and yet the 3 feet advantage gained by that is now causing pretty close to $3 billion worth of capital investment in the lower Columbia River in largely export-related facilities. This is a project that costs about $200 million to accomplish. And as I said, it's a piece of infrastructure which no one here probably is directly related to, but indirectly it has had an enormous impact on us. It's the reason why the transcontinental railroads came to Portland, because we had this export infrastructure. We have 2 interstate freeways that are developed in order to serve a population that, that came to this area as a result of the development of this export potential. And so Oregon has grown organically into a real export powerhouse, and I think you saw that demonstrated in the earlier conversations.
Fantastic. So, Gary, Port of Morrow,
Right.
tell me where that is.
Okay.
And then you got, I mean, I'm going to assume that not everybody in the room is smarter than me, most, but not everybody.
Right.
But you guys have made some really key investments in your infrastructure and that have led to growth around you. And I'd love for you to talk about that.
Okay. Well, like Chris, there must be a few other people in this room that may have not been to Morrow County or the Port of Morrow, but just in case you haven't, I'm sure there's many that have been, but just in case you haven't, it's 165 miles east of Portland along the Columbia River. We're kind of strategically located. That's where the Interstate 84, the Columbia River, and the Union Pacific Main Line intersect. So because of those modes of transportation, the port was formed. Actually, the last port in the state of Oregon is the Port of Morrow. And I guess we kind of like to tell folks that we're actually the second largest port in Oregon. We have the Port of Portland and then everyone else pretty much, but infrastructure is a key part of our success and what we are about. But it's not just the transportation components. It's investment in water and sewer, in roads and power supply. It's just a combination of all of those factors that lead to our industrial park and taking an advantage of our natural resource-based economy that we have in our region. We're an ag region, and we've been fortunate to be able to create a lot of jobs and support our industries to do more and create some great opportunities. And those return on investments, we talked about family wage jobs earlier. You know, Morrow County is the 5th highest average family wage county in the state of Oregon because of the infrastructure and the investments we've been able to make.
And you mentioned when we were talking, because I'm trying to wrap my brain around it. So a business is considering, they want to relocate into your area. Mm-hmm. And they come and they say, we need these pieces of infrastructure. If you don't provide those, they go somewhere else.
That's correct. If you're not ready to do business with customers in rural areas in particular, unless you're on the I-5 corridor or next to the Portland International Airport, our rural communities, we have to be prepared as best we can to be able to show that business that we're ready to do business. And that's what we do at the Port of Morrow as well.
Interesting. So, Bill, what do you think are the key obstacles right now in terms of infrastructure around the state and opportunities?
Well, and I think first it's important to acknowledge what I think you started off by saying, and that is infrastructure really references a very broad array of things that we might not always think of as infrastructure, but telecommunications is a very good example of that, and something that we're certainly seeing a lot of activity around now. But, you know, it's pretty basic. Roads and bridges and rail, the channel, which I mentioned earlier, story in the paper today about the Snake River channel being maintained up in Lewiston, because we do have barge service between Lewiston and Portland. And all of these things are critically important. But I think on the road front, it's important to reflect on this. We have an interstate system that took really about 30 years to complete. The federal government paid for about 80% of it, and now they pay for almost none of it. And the burden for maintaining the interstate system is increasingly falling on the hands of states. And yet, the revenue available to do that and to maintain the traditional responsibilities is falling short. And so we do have a tremendous problem maintaining what we have, not to mention expanding the infrastructure that is going to be required really to support the opportunities that we heard about earlier today. So it is it's a big, big challenge, and it's one that we have overcome previously in Oregon, but one that we certainly have to address. And if you've been following the challenges here in Portland around the street feed, you get a sense about how difficult this conversation is.
Well, and it's so interesting. If I go back to the ag conversation for a second, Stacy, talking about one of the pieces of infrastructure in that industry they need is a cattle processing plant here. Okay, so that's one piece of something that you would call infrastructure. Here we're really talking about more bedrock pieces in the community. Okay, so we're going to hear from a bunch of different leaders around the state about some key catalytic projects. What's your advice to policymakers around the state in terms of thinking about investment in infrastructure? What do you want to make sure they hear?
I think it's really critical for our legislators and the people that are going to make decisions to think about patient capital investment in rural communities and communities throughout the state. If we're trying to disperse these jobs throughout our state, investment in infrastructure has to take place, and that capacity has to be made. And people want results immediately, and it takes time, it takes investment, and it takes ongoing effort. And that is a key issue for us in development.
So, so it's not just about whether the Selwood Bridge is going to fall down or not. It's really about our ability to compete in the global marketplace. And Bill, I think in our earlier conversation you mentioned some stat about how much dollars we generate through global trade. Did you have that? Did you make that up?
I try not to make those things up too much, but
you could say, "No, wait." He gets a point because he got a laugh on the infrastructure panel. Okay, that is not easy.
Yeah.
All right.
You told me that was my goal for
Right.
this panel, was to get a laugh. So last year, roughly $16 billion exported through the Columbia port area. It's a little bit of a nuanced figure, but it's a big number. And it is a rapidly growing number. And the important thing about trade, of course, is that it generates jobs that are above the family average wage here in Oregon consistently, and those jobs are growing at a rate faster than all other jobs in the local economy. So trade is incredibly important to us.
So what happens if we don't address some of these fundamental issues?
Well, I think Gary made the point, made it well, and that is it'll begin to dissipate. It won't be overnight. It just won't grow organically, and I think that is where most growth actually comes from. It's not big companies moving in, it's that gradual organic growth, and people will run out of either their ability to grow or frankly they'll be outcompeted by people who live or work in other areas that have greater and more efficient access to these vital global markets.
Perfect. That's exactly what I hoped you would say. That is the perfect segue. We get to now hear from some key leaders around the state. Thank you both. That was awesome. There are some very interesting infrastructure projects around the state that are ready to go and could be really catalytic for their communities. And we're going to get to hear briefly about a few of them.